the art of communication, the art of the conversation, the art of engaging the client, all these different things that are part of just a simple act of sketching that we don't really get when you're just like, hold on a minute, let me get out my computer and click, 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 click. It's just like, wait, hold on. I think I got your idea. Wait, click, click, click. It's just like, really, that's not a conversation. That's that's something completely different. What's architecture really about? Archispeak is the show that dares to peek under the architectural kimono, exposing what architecture really is, what it is that architects really do, and show you why we're passionate about our chosen profession. I'm Cormac Phelan. Join Evan Troxel, Neil Pan, and me as we have a casual conversation about all things architecture, which includes all the stuff people don't talk about. Think you already know what architecture is really about? Tune in and find out. It's time for some Archispeak.
So welcome to episode 18 of the Archispeak Podcast. I'm Neil Pan.
I'm Evan Troxel.
And I'm Cormac Phelan.
And first up this week, I believe we have a friend of the show to announce.
Yeah, this week we had a $10 donation, and this friend of the show is a guy who's starting a new website that everybody should check out called architecturecareerguide.com, and his name is Ryan Hansanawat. And Ryan has been talking to us online. He's on Twitter, he's on Facebook, and so thanks, Ryan. It's great to hear from you again, and we hope that all is well at architectscareerguide.com. So thanks.
So this week, I think, or for this episode, I guess I should say, we were thinking of talking about the traditional way, and I don't know, Evan, why don't you start us off with this one? Because I think you put this on our list at one point. What's the traditional way for you?
Yeah, what is the tradition? Well, it's something that comes up every once in a while in the studio, and one of the friends of the show, Mark, he constantly reminds me of how fast he can do things by hand. And, he's right. I think there's a lot of times when there's some things that we do nowadays in studio or in our jobs that we do it on the computer because that's the way we do things, but I don't think we really think what maybe the right way to do certain tasks are going to be, and so we end up just doing them kind of how we do them, or we see other people do them. And so I think there's something to be said about the way things have been done and how we were trained. And I mean, obviously this is going to be different for every kind of generation that goes through architecture school and that works in the industry, but I think it's something worth talking about because we do deal with this every day. I know, Cormac, you sketch a ton, and I love to start out with a roll of trace. I heard this great saying the other day when I met with somebody. He said that his professor, when he was in school, would his professor, like there was only one, he would set a clean roll of trace down and say, "The answer's in there."
Oh, nice.
And I loved that. I thought that was so awesome because it's true. You go through that roll of trace, and I mean, that was evidenced on my work table today as I would do a sketch and then tear it off and then do another one on top and then tear it off and do another one on top. And I was, 20 layers deep into the trace paper, and it's right. He's right. The answer is going to be somewhere in that roll of trace, and it's probably close to the end. But I thought that was kind of a cool way to look at it.
Well, I mean, though we're somewhat focused on talking about drawing and hand drawing and things like that, or at least that's kind of how we were thinking about it. Good example today was out on a job site. And they were like, well, we just had these couple of RFIs come in, and we wanted to see if you can go ahead and fast track them. I'm like, well, what are they? And, we talked about them. And I said, well, just print them out for me. And so they did. And they were looking at me and they're like, well, how are you going to answer them? Like,
what are you going to do with those? Yeah.
I'm going to take a pen out of my bag and I'm going to write the answer on that piece of paper. And they were looking at me like, well, can't you just wait till you get back to the office? I'm like, but I literally can give you the answer now.
Yeah.
And call it a day.
Yeah.
I'll sign the bottom of it where it says, that it's authenticated by me. And,
it's not even a digital signature, Cormac. What are you going to do? It's not legit.
And, it was just kind of baffling. I mean, we always get this, well, what happens to an architecture office when the power, when you lose power or something, or if the server goes down, or, like what seems to happen in our office a lot is we lose, connection with our server licenses. And so people can't open up Revit. Oh no, they just can't work anymore. I'm like, really? How about you've got all this other stuff you can do, and there's a paper and pencil right there. Get at it.
Yeah. Well, I think it was about a week ago or so. Bob over at lifeofanarchitect.com had a quote one that I pulled out of his article on architectural sketches. Was the architectural profession needs you to sketch. It's something that is romantically intrinsic to our profession, and we shouldn't lose it. And I thought that was just a perfect way to kind of sum it up, because you're right. What happens when the world loses electricity for a couple hours? Like, everything shuts down, right? I remember being at a store once, and I was up at the register, and for some reason it wasn't working, and the person couldn't add up the total.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And so it's like everything just stops when that happens. And it's painful.
Funny you say that, because I was at a restaurant and they lost power. And they're like, well, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to take payments if you don't have cash. And they came out with like handwritten receipts and stuff, and you sort of had to take them at face value that their math was right. But then she came out with a credit card machine. And she's looking at the thing like, I have no idea what to do. And
somebody handed me this thing.
Yeah. And I literally taught her how to, I was like, you put the credit card here, you put the slip over the top of it, you pull the thing over, it makes an impression of the card. And
Listen here, youngster.
Exactly. And then you write it out and you total it up and you have the person sign it, and that's it. And they're like, wow. It's like... Yeah. It's amazing. Well, this old technology.
That is like that's like, a chisel on a stone.
It's true.
Can you imagine? I can't imagine. One Christmas, slightly off topic here, I was working at a music store as a teenager, I guess I was a teenager. Over the Christmas holiday, that's how we did it.
Yeah.
I mean, there were literally hundreds of people in line, trying to buy albums. Google that. And cassette tapes, right? What's an album?
Vinyl?
Vinyl, yes, vinyl. Old school vinyl, and cassettes. We didn't really have too many CDs, not DVDs. My gosh, that's like, way newer. The only CDs we had were like, a few classical music CDs. That was about it. So this is a while back, but yeah, that was like, and okay. How about this? Looking up fraudulent credit card numbers.
Yeah, in
the little paper books that they used to have.
Yeah,
and so you've got all these people in line. They're waiting to buy something. And you got, okay, just a minute. I've got these, 50,000 numbers I got to go through to look up and see if your credit card's fraudulent or not. That was when they would offer somebody to work the cash only line on the other side of the store. My hand went up. Yeah, I'll volunteer for that. I can deal with cash. I don't want to deal with these damn credit card machines. But anyway, sorry, off topic there. But back on topic. The traditional way. I don't know if this is really traditional, but my CAD skills. I'm trying to learn a new CAD program, so my CAD skills are sketchy at best right now, and I just find that I was working on trying to redesign this bathroom area of this house that I'm doing, and to try and input the walls and throw the toilet in as a model piece. If you're using Revit, trying to put these model type pieces in and move them around, and I just gave up. I went over and sat down at my desk and actually drew it up by hand, and then rolled out the tray. Kind of drew the outside perimeters of the spaces, and then just in just a couple of minutes, and then just started rolling trace over it and said, well, what if I move this space here, move that space there, and switch it around? And I don't know. To me, guys, that I don't know if that's the traditional way or if that's what Bob's talking about when he's talking about sketching, but that was the only way I could do it. And maybe that's just the way I was taught, so that's the only way I know. I mean, maybe newer kids newer people coming out of school now, they could do the same thing, but do it in the computer, that they've spent more time with.
Now, that's I'm glad you brought that up, because so we were sitting at another project meeting out on site, and the client who, she's an architect, but now she works for the county government and is a project manager for capital construction for one of the local public schools.
Cormac, I think we need to send you some sunscreen every time you give us an example. You're on site outside at a meeting. Maybe a hat. Somebody needs to send Cormac a hat.
I want one of those fancy Archispeak ones
that we don't have yet. Sorry, teaser.
Well, if we got some more friends of the show, we might be able to
Gotta get on that.
There we go. All right, sorry to interrupt.
Well, but she had started talking about basically the lost art of sketching and being able to convey, and we've talked about this before in previous shows, is the ability to be able to convey an idea through the pencil and just quickly sketching something up. And it actually came off of the contractor had gone out and done some field measurements. An RFI was, he was getting ready to generate an RFI, and he did a quick sketch. As detailed as this sketch was, he basically sketched the solution right there. Yeah. And we didn't need to go any further. I mean, we talked about it. We said, yeah, that'll work. And all he basically did was, can you bless this sketch?
Right.
That same sketch with all of the dimensions and having it scaled out properly would have taken somebody, quite possibly an hour, because it was a section. It took him 5 minutes.
Yeah, or working out details. I mean, there's so many examples of that. And I guess something that we should probably make clear is, I use technology as in it's a major part of my life, right? As far as design goes, as far as a lot of things go. But this is a tool that in your toolbox that you cannot and should not ignore. And because of the story that you're telling right now, it's a way to visualize and explain something that otherwise would have taken a long time to do. Because there's a lot of people who are in school now who rarely touch pencil or pen to paper to work out an idea. It's typically visualized in 3D the whole time. But I guess what we're trying to convey here is the importance of being able to convey an idea very quickly. And there's really not another tool available in your toolbox that can allow you to do it so fast as just sketching. I think that there's just a huge amount of power in that pen and on that piece of paper. And what I put in my blog post, there's some people you watch sketch and it is painful to watch, right? And there's some people who can't sketch at all and they know it, and so they do maybe they draft it out on the computer. I know a guy who drafts out, and that's his way of sketching. And once I finally kind of realized that he wasn't drawing something for real, that was his way of sketching, it made a little more sense to me. So I think that there's also kind of digital sketching.
Well, yeah. But
anyway, I wanted to point that out because I don't want to leave people thinking like,
oh, well,
we're not living in the past here
right.
either. But it's a very important tool.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, we're not trying to say that the digital medium that we use in our day-to-day lives in the architecture firm isn't extraordinarily important, and it's certainly not going away. It's just going to be more and more prevalent in the offices, and it's that the sketch, the hand sketching and stuff is something that's a quick thought that you can get out that doesn't take, well, let me boot up my machine, hold on a minute, let me pull up Revit or let me pull up CAD or whatever else, and go through all of these steps, because by the time you actually did that, your sketch could be done and the information conveyed. Well,
plus you're probably being too accurate. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you start thinking, you have a certain frame of mind when you're using tools like that, where you are measuring things and you're drawing to scale and you're thinking in those terms. When you're drawing in a sketch, you could be completely off, but it's more about the idea.
Right.
And the information you're conveying than it is about being accurate. And so it gives you some freedom to, I don't know, to have some artistic license, right? Some license to it where it doesn't have such accurate weighting to it, to the whole thing. People know, like this is a sketch. And so there's, you take it for what it is.
Does the accuracy of the computer, does it make it harder to do that? I mean, you mentioned somebody that kind of digitally sketches, and that's the way he works. But to my mind, it's just much more difficult to have that freedom when you have such rigidity in. Okay, well, draw this line over here. Well, how far is it? I have to tell the computer where it is. Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, yeah, you do. Or you could eyeball it, but listen to this. This is a great story.
But then if you eyeball it, how good is that in the future?
Well,
right?
yeah.
I mean, it's useless, right?
So this fits perfect.
All
right. So you're going to do a site plan. All right. And you've got like a Google map to go off, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was just kind of watching this conversation unfold one day. And one guy is drawing over it by hand and, very quickly kind of just working out ideas over this Google Earth printed out image. And this other guy wants the same Google Earth image. He's going to put it in the computer. And he made the comment. He's like, well, you're doing that by hand, It's not very accurate, is it? Right? Over a site plan? He's like, well, it's as accurate as I can be. He goes, well, I'm going to draw it in CAD. And I'm sorry, you're tracing over a raster image.
Yeah.
It is no more accurate than sketching on paper. But he had the perception that because he was drawing it in CAD, that it was more precise than actually using a scale and a pencil with a piece of vellum over it. And they're exactly the same is the point, right?
Right.
No one is more precise, but when you draw with a computer, there is an expectation of precision, even if it isn't. And I can tell you that I have worked on projects with students who have graduated, who work in, it doesn't matter what application it is, but I expect it to be precise when I get a file from them that is a 3D model or some drafted orthographic plan. And when it isn't, I'm like, what the hell is this? Right? Because I expect precision at that point. But when it's just kind of eyeballed, it's really weird to get a digital file that's been eyeballed. So, especially when it comes to architecture. I mean, if you're working in another discipline like character design or something like that, then of course it's eyeballed. But not in architecture.
Well, let me ask you guys this question here. Since we're talking about the traditional way, when we drew things by hand, I mean, actual CDs, I mean, you could try and be as accurate as you could, but there was just no way you were going to get a 3.5-inch wall, and
Right.
I mean, it was really tough to get that pencil
the
width.
thickness of the graphite, right? That
Right,
would
exactly.
that could be inches.
So
nobody builds off of that, though.
Well,
They
no.
build off of the
Everybody's building
dimensions.
off of the dimensions.
Right.
Exactly.
It's absolutely true.
So here, let me ask you guys this, and this is a little funny story. But one of the firms I consulted with over the last couple of years, the principal of the firm was a few years older than we were doing the CAD work, and his insistence was all the walls were drawn at 4 inches, not 3.5, but 4. So here we are using a
because
computer.
those are actual tick marks on a scale, right?
Well, yes, they're actual tick marks on a scale, but to his mind, he wanted everything. All the walls had to be 4 inches. So it just drove me batty trying to dimension something because I always knew something was off somewhere,
Right.
and that's the accuracy of these computers, is that we can actually draw these walls at 3.5 inches. Or
Yeah.
now, when I'm working in Vectorworks and we've got these nice little wall components, that it's like not only am I drawing a wall at 3.5 inches, but
You're
I've got
drawing
a
the
half
actual
inch.
makeup of the wall.
Yeah, I've got a half inch of gypboard on one side and some plywood on the other side and some stucco, and I can draw to the perimeter and show all of that, the exterior components on the outside of the wood. This is like fantastic. But oh my God, it is
Your dimensions look like crap.
Well, because you can dimension to the face of stud, which is cool. So you can get the same sort of dimensioning that we would do when we drew CAD with just 2 lines, right? I mean, they were just straight 2 lines. But what is mind-numbingly just drives me batty is, trying to get all these components, to get them to come together, and, if the walls don't connect right, then they don't look right, and it just drives me crazy.
I'm working on a CMU project, and, those blocks are not 8 by 8 by 16.
Right.
Right? They're 15 and 5/8 by 7 and 5/8 by 8, or by 7 and 5/8. And so it's like, when the question comes down to, do we draw it nominal or do we draw it accurate?
Well,
And you have a bunch of people who have done it the traditional way, who want you to draw it nominal. And then you've got all of the other people who have grown up in a world of BIM, and it's like, well, the computer's accurate, why don't we draw it that way? And then you're trying to think, well, how's the contractor actually going to build it? And so all of that stuff starts to really complicate things.
well, the way it's funny that you said that. You must have been reading my mind, because today somebody was asking me about what was the design intent of a particular location of a door, and I was looking at the drawings, and sure enough, the dimensions were off. It's block coursing, but it was showing 9 foot. Like, that's not block coursing.
Right.
And so I started my little typical rant about block coursing and how hard is it to, think in 8 inches and all of this other stuff. But the contractor actually said, well, all we really want to know is, is it block coursing? Should it be 9'4"? And I was like, yeah, it should be 9'4", and that'll put this door here, and it doesn't really affect anything. And when you think about it, you're still going to draw in 8 inches, but so now what it is that you're assuming that the 8 inches comprises the nominal dimension of the block and the nominal dimension of the mortar joint.
Right.
To comprise the 8 inches. And then you go from there, and it just...
Right.
So, but that's even hard to explain to, especially to new kids right out of college, because they're thinking about, just drawing it this way, and you try to explain to them how when you dimension it out, a block layer is going to want to just say, okay, this room is going to be 11 foot 4 by 9 foot 4. That works out to being 8 inches. I can lay out all my block with all my my mortar joints and everything else. Boom, easy.
It's on module, yeah.
And so I was being asked by one of the interns, well, why does that matter? And then you explain to them, well, it actually is a lot cheaper to lay a block without cutting it than cutting it. And if you're saying that it's 9 foot, they've got to take a block and cut 4 inches off of it. Now you have more labor, and then I was like, it's this whole kind of
and it's not just one block, right? It's a bunch.
Yeah,
it's all of them that stack up.
What
you should have done, Cormac, is just grab a block, take them out for lunch, or take a lunch break and go out to the back of the building and say, here's one block. Here's your chisel. Go knock 4 inches off of that and tell me how hard it is.
Yeah.
And then, now do it 50 times.
Yeah. And now do it 50 times.
Well,
and then come back, and then I bet you they will never dimension it at 9 feet again.
Well, it's more trying to get them to understand that simple little things, simple little rules of thumb that we grew up with, the old traditional methods of showing things in the nominal thing, actually have real life cost implications when you're building in the field. So when you say, oh yeah, it shouldn't be too hard to just, knock 4 inches off that. Well, the block layer, I can't remember what the cost was. He's basically saying that, a brick is 50 cents a brick for labor. But so now if you have him cutting that brick, now it's 55 cents. Well, multiply that by however much you have to do, and you've just escalated the cost. So it's kind of this little snowball effect of just not understanding the rule of thumb. But I didn't mean to get off on a tangent.
Yeah.
It's just my little
in defense
coursing pet peeve.
In defense of this person, I mean, you just mentioned rule of thumb. I mean, we all have to learn those things, right?
Right.
So how do we learn it? Well, we learn it by dimensioning something.
What a perfect opportunity.
Perfect opportunity. I mean, that's how you learn. You make a mistake, right? You made the mistake. You dimensioned it at 9 feet, and in lieu of going out back and cutting 4 inches off a block, we're going to just, here's a little tip, rule of thumb. Don't do that. And then, now that person's learned, right? I mean, that's how we learn.
Yeah.
And we learned a lot of these things because we maybe started off by drafting by hand, but
someone had to teach us, right?
Yeah, somebody had to teach us. So we drew it wrong, but we just drew it by hand, and it wasn't quite as accurate. All you had to do was go in and change the dimension, and nothing else actually moved, right? I mean, how many times? I don't know how many times you guys did this. So I'll ask the question. Have you gone in and, okay, well, something is not drawn quite right, but you just, change the dimension a few inches one way or the other. You don't redraw the plan, but in CAD, you're stuck that way. It's like, well, you can go in and modify a dimension, but and not affect all the other walls and such, and then if you do that, somebody will scold you because you shouldn't.
Revit, you can't.
You can't anymore.
You can't?
No. You cannot
force.
Well,
no, because
you can't force
if
a dimension.
You do that, you're actually going to move the wall.
Yep.
You've got to draw it right. And that's actually one thing I really like about Revit is it actually says no cheating.
Right.
No cheating. I like that. No exploding of dimensions, huh?
Right.
Oh yeah.
Nice.
But
you can tell who's the.
But
Revit
you can still draw a wall at 9 foot. And 5.
You could still put it in the wrong place. Yeah.
Yeah. It could still be drawn at like 5/16.
But that's when your QA has to catch that. Yeah, but okay, so this is cool because what this really comes down to is kind of the old saying, right? Which was when you drew by hand, every line that went on the paper meant something,
exactly.
Right? It had a purpose, and so now I think, okay, so I kind of feel two ways about this, which is the first thing is, yeah, when you're drawing by hand, there is a process. It's not like you draw one line and then you copy the line, right? You draw one line and then you draw another line and you think about where the next one's going and where does it start, where does it end. And what I really love about sketching is at its loosest form when you kind of just trace over the same shape 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 times, because you're just kind of burning it into the paper. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's real loose, and you're just, it's not perfect in any way, and every time you draw over it, you're kind of tracing over it. I'm doing it here on the table right now. I'm just thinking, like, you're just trying to get it some certain shape until it feels right.
Right.
And it gets thicker and messier and heavier, and pretty soon you're smearing the ink on the page with the palm of your hand. But that's part of it. When you're drawing on the computer and you draw a line and then you do multi-copy, right? Boom, 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 boom. And they're all the same weight, and they're all the same length, and they're all perfectly precise, but they don't mean a whole lot. And to me, that's kind of where, when people are sketching, in my air quotes, on the computer, that's where it starts to lose something, and you don't get that slow process where you are thinking as you're actually drawing the line of what it means. And that's one thing that I think is so important to get across when you're actually sketching. There's a guy that I know who's a lighting designer, and he comes into our office every once in a while. He's a rep, and every time he sits down at a table with you, he pulls out a stack of 8.5 by 11 paper. And he pulls out a pen, and he pulls out his lead holder, and he just places it in front of him. And as soon as you start talking to him, he starts drawing things, right? He starts drawing a person in perspective, and he draws the room, and okay, what if we do this? And he pulls out a yellow pencil, and he just kind of quickly, okay, this is what the direction the light's going. And I love talking to him because I love watching that. And I think I'm like that with my wife. I said, I try to explain something to her, and I want to draw it for her. She's like, can't you just tell me? And it's like, no, that's not how I communicate. I communicate through pictures.
Right.
And I find a lot of value, personal value in that. I think that, like, that's who I am. And I really love that part of the training and the architecture and the career that I have, is that I get to communicate like that. Like, to me, it's a privilege.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's funny you say that, because I'm sitting there sketching right now on a Post-it note with a lead holder.
Yeah.
Red pen.
And you get to feel, right? You get to feel what the tip of that instrument is against the paper that you're using. And it's different if you're using a moleskin notebook versus a piece of trace versus just a normal 8.5 by 11 piece of Xerox paper, depending on the pen or the pencil you're using. And I kind of like that aspect of it too. That's like the real analog part of it to me that I really like. Like, there's certain pens I like and there's certain pens I hate using, Well, I just love that part of the artfulness of it.
Well, you're as you're talking, I was reading, and I posted a link, and we'll post it onto the webpage, because I think this is going to be a series that I think I'm going to enjoy following, because I enjoy the work of this particular architecture firm, McAlpine Tankersley, out of Montgomery, Alabama. Just absolute beautiful work these guys do. But the drawings that come out of their office, from the sketches of the initial concepts all the way through, are just this beautiful craft. And so they're starting a new blog series, and it's it's basically titled Drawing to a Conclusion: The Art of Architecture, Part 1. And he's particularly talking about exactly what we're talking about now, the craft of sketching. But if you guys can bear with me a second, let me read this. Most architecture firms utilize the computer as their main means of composing drawings that will eventually translate into a building. If you visit a given architecture school nowadays, you'd be hard-pressed to find a parallel bar or a triangle, once the base of tools of our trade. Drawing in the practice of architecture is quickly becoming a lost art. In the technological process happening in our profession, I'm afraid what's subsequently slipping away is the actual art of architecture. and you just said, you basically just said the exact same thing, where what we're losing by sketching in the computer or trying to be too precise and trying to get a finished product too quickly is the actual art of not just in the sketching and the actual production of things, but it's the art of, analog problem solving. It's the art of being able to have kind of a personal interaction. There's all of these other things that come out of the sketch that are beyond just the product of the sketch. It's everything else. And you were when you were talking about this guy who comes into your office and pulls out a sketchbook and starts sketching and talking and all that other stuff. I mean, think of you just said how much you enjoy those conversations. That right there alone is just this brilliant bit of artistry of the art of communication, the art of the conversation, the art of engaging the client, all these different things that are part of just a simple act of sketching that we don't really get when you're just like, hold on a minute, let me get out my computer and click, 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 click. It's just like, wait, hold on. I think I got your idea. Wait, click, click, click. It's just like, really, that's not a conversation. That's that's something completely different.
Well, something that is really interesting to me about that whole process is that you've got a set of tools in your hand that there's something about simplifying that communication process that makes it so much more approachable. How many times I don't know if this happens in your office or not, but where there is CAD work that happens or there is 3D modeling that happens. I mean, look at the popularity of SketchUp. Why is SketchUp so popular? Right? Because it kind of looks analog, right?
Right.
I mean, you turn on edge extensions and you turn on jitter and you turn on endpoints and these are all analog. They're all digital representations of analog technique. And to me, what's funny is that, digital has gotten to the point where we have non-photorealistic rendering applications now. If you're using Artlantis or there's several rendering programs out there that have kind of post-processing techniques that turn it into watercolor or turn it into colored pencil, or we've got Photoshop filters to go ahead and do that kind of thing. I think that says right there, number one, you could say, okay, that's pretty freaking hilarious, right? That we go to the length of modeling all this stuff. But, obviously there are shortcuts, right? When you want to get shadows and you want to get people and you want to get cars in your scene, like digital's the way to go. But then to turn it back into analog, right? I think that's kind of the funny part. That's the ironic part of it.
Well, so why do you think people want that? I mean, we would.
It's approachable. Yeah. And it's what I said earlier. It doesn't feel like it's done, and I think that's a huge part of actually doing things by hand. And there's so many times where I will present something to a client. I will present it in black and white because I don't want them to latch onto a color that I've used, right? Because everybody has their favorite color, right? And I know the person I'm going to present it to, there's a 50-50 chance that they hate orange. So I'm not going to show them the model that I've done where I've thrown the thing in there that's in orange because to me it just means something. I don't know what it means yet, and I don't know what it's made out of yet. But there's a 50-50 chance that they hate orange. So I can't show them in orange because I want them to look at form.
Right.
I don't want them to look at, or I want them to look at the solution to the problem. I don't want them to look at what color it is yet. There's a lot of things that we do to disguise kind of how far we've got. We want to bring it back a couple of notches so that we can actually talk about it and so it doesn't feel finished. And I guess that's what I'm trying to get to, is that there's a lot of times where when we just draw something by hand, it doesn't feel finished yet. And when you're working with a client, that's a big deal to make them a part of the process and to work it out right there with them. And there's a huge value in that.
Well, then there's also it feels warmer and a little bit more comfortable.
Yep.
Because we used to have, back when I was, in solo practice, I had a friend who we went to school with, and he does beautiful architectural renderings. And we would basically draft it up in SketchUp or something, send him a SketchUp model. He would basically get a view that, he thought would really capture what we were trying to achieve in the building. And then he would send it back to us and say, well, do you like this view? And then he would take that view and print it out. He'd hand sketch over the top of it.
Yeah, of course.
All the entourage and everything else. And then ultimately what would come back to us is a real, hand-drawn, hand-sketched, hand watercolor rendering.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where we were using them so much that that our clients would say, hey, can we use this in our marketing material? And this is when we were doing a lot more of the, T&D, the traditional neighborhood design work and new urbanist stuff, that they liked the more traditional kind of old school feel of the artistry and felt like that was kind of in keeping with what the kind of values that they were selling, and would use it in their marketing. And but if you look at it, it was just so beautiful because it lets you idealize this, this wonderful place that you could live in, And,
well, it lets your mind kind of fill in the blanks, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. There's definitely something to be said about not having it all detailed out, figured out. That is really compelling for people because they get to use their imagination a little bit. It's more fun for them. It's more engaging for the audience on some levels to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Well, something we haven't we touched on a little bit with presentation that you were just mentioning, but how does having the ability to create these watercolor effects, and you can argue whether or not they're just as good, or I think probably with the right talented person, they could probably create something in Photoshop or some other tool that would look pretty much the same as if somebody did it by hand. So throwing that side of the argument out, can we, is it just as good, or can we explore more options? Because one of the things, and this is now commonplace today, I guess, but wasn't quite so commonplace when I was in school, is when we were first using Archicad to create, literally dozens of different views. So like you said, Cormac, today I guess you do something like that in that program, or like SketchUp or something, and create all these different views and then pick one. But to have the ability to just a click of a button here, that's oversimplification, but to add these different textured effects or these different wall line effects to create these, and filters to create these watercolor effects and things, does it give us the ability to do that portion of the work faster? Now, granted, there is the old school graphic rendering person. I know one of the first big offices I worked in, had a dedicated team of graphics people, and they, did watercolors, pens and inks and all that fun stuff. And it was very time consuming. And I think it's probably today, quite a bit faster. It may not be as good, but it's just that technology's changing that portion of our business, and it's changing, as something like what we were talking about earlier, is that changing? Are we losing that ability to sketch, as in the same way that we've probably completely have lost all of the presentation type skills to the computer now? I don't know a lot of firms that would do presentations by hand and color it all by hand. Maybe in your case, Cormac, those were more one-offs that you were doing that became, more consistent, but I don't know, I'm kind of starting to go off here, but is that also happening now to CAD work as well? To generating the drawings, or I mean, we're all talking about losing the ability to sketch, and maybe we are, but we also lost a lot of the hand presentation skills as well. And has that what has that done to the industry?
Well, you threw a lot out there, and
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, and all great points of things that we should probably talk about and address. But I'll say, and this is personally speaking, that this is what I do, and this is what not everybody in our office does, but me for damn sure will do. Everything that is presented in the SD process, and when we're doing schematic design process, when we're getting all those concepts out there and all that other stuff, everything that we present to the owner is hand-drawn. Because there's really no point, because it's going to change so many times that why would we spend a lot of time committing things to the computer when we can just crank it out by hand, and we can crank out tons of it. I wanted to, kind of bring up that Evan had posted a photograph of his desk, and the only thing that my eye was drawn to, other than the fact that it was awfully clean,
I didn't zoom out enough,
was the fact that he had, several sheets of trace and then he was, doing some programming. And it was all loose, and it was bubble drawings of adjacencies and things like that. And, until you really work that out with the client and, have them, especially in, like what we're doing with schools and stuff, until you really get all of that stuff laid out, I personally don't feel there's a need to commit so much time in the computer. And so we don't. My team we always do it by hand. I'm kind of like the quick draw, so I love doing the drawing, so I'll draw and I'll, pull out my chalk pad markers and, draw and get a little high while I'm drawing because that stuff is pungent markers. Yeah. But, and it's the same thing for, conceptual renderings, conceptual elevations. I mean, we do all of that. And we'll scan them, and we'll put text on there, and, maybe we'll, arrange it with the title block and all of that other stuff, or, just get it to the standard graphics. But everything that we put on the board will be hand-drawn, and we'll print it out. And I've gone to presentations to the Board of Education, to historic commissions, all by hand. And they love it because, it feels like we're really trying to, connect and listen. And the great thing about it is that then you can pull the board down during the, after you've presented everything, and they're like, well, let's change this. And you pull the board down, and you start pull out your trace and start sketching over the top of it while you're at the meeting. And you can basically create another drawing that looks just like what you just presented to them. Yeah. And I love doing it that way. Well,
there's something to be said about doing it with them.
Yeah, because
instead of taking it back, I think this is a problem that is inherently, it has to do with our profession, where we will listen and we will work with a client, but then we go away and we work in our secret laboratories.
Yes.
And then we come back with the solution, or with three options.
Right.
Which drives me freaking crazy, right? But it's like, but here you are with the answer, in, again, the magic air quotes. And what you're talking about adds so much value to the relationship, which adds so much value to the project, because now there is ownership from all sides because they're sitting at the table at the same time. There is like this is something you're going to be able to tell a story about later, which is going to make it even better because you did it with them instead of for them. And you're taking the mystery out of it. And that is huge for people to actually get kind of just emotionally involved in the project. Right? Because if you do it in the secret lab and you come back with the answer, Like, there's no emotion to that. Like, you just checked off a series of boxes to as far as they're concerned, right? Yep, answer, here it is. It hits this program. Yep, check. It's probably in the budget. Check. Instead of working through it with them and then saying, well, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? Well, let's work that other idea into here that you had. And I think that there's so much value to that. And architects have for the most part, our profession has failed because we do work in the secret lab.
Right.
And it's just, it pisses me off because there's so many people out there that love seeing behind the curtain. And I mean, that's why, one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast.
Exactly.
Well, Cormac, I want to, this may not be true in every case, but let me just throw this out there, is that, don't you think that, I mean, you said you do all these presentations by hand, and certainly they're going to change. And at some point in time, you commit to putting it into the computer. Yeah. And most likely, it changes again, and it continues to change. And so, I guess,
there's nothing different there.
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying, would it hurt to get some of that into the computer sooner so that, the changes maybe, get a little easier to make? Or when you're drawing, because I know that one thing that happens, because I do something very similar to what you're talking about as far as, presenting to clients and things. I'll draw by hand and then scan it and add some text to it and then print it back out. And, one of the frustrating things, though, is that when I have to do it again and maybe make some minor changes to it, and it's like, wait a minute, I'm drawing this whole damn thing over again, or if I can draw a piece of it and then try in Photoshop to kind of merge the two together so I don't have to completely redraw everything again. And it just seems to me like I'm wasting my time doing that, where if I already had it there in the computer and I just modify it or a piece of it, and then I'm not redrawing it again. Everything's already set up. I don't even have to add the text again. I change the date and spit it back out. Well,
but see, that I think is an approach for time saving.
Yeah.
And in the way that I'm approaching it is, I don't mind redrawing the whole entire thing, because sometimes I'll see something that I either missed. It's like, oops, I forgot a program space, or I see a better way to, basically interact maybe between like a new addition and the existing building and how I can modify a few things. Or, I'm sketching to say, maybe it's better to put the corridor here than here, and those kind of things. And it just lets me go through that whole process. I mean, I guess, Evan, you were talking about, the I guess, professor that was talking about everything could be found in, the role of trace.
The answers in there, yeah.
And I had a professor very similar who said, if you don't go through at least one or two roles of trace in the project that you're doing, and you're not cutting like plan, section, elevation all at the same time and just going back and forth and everything else, you're really doing yourself, you're really not thinking through the project enough to give yourself, to be fully informed of how all of the different spaces interrelate with each other.
Yeah, I think, Neil, when you were saying what you just stated, I was thinking, I don't mind redrawing it because every time I redraw it, I learn something new.
Yeah. Yes.
About it. And I understand what you're saying about it, but I guess one of the things that I see that's wrong with architecture is that it's trying too hard to be like the other professions where it's all about time spent. It's not about working through the problem anymore. It's about how fast can I do this?
Right.
And I think that's another topic for another time, maybe.
Sure, but Evan, I guess that's great, and I agree with you. I mean, I discover things when I'm redrawing it as well. Maybe something I hadn't thought of, like you said, Cormac. But at the same time, that's great. But the realities are, and we talked about it, there's a deadline, and it's like, wow, okay, well, if I had part of this already drawn and I didn't have to redraw it again, I'd be going to bed at 10 o'clock instead of 2 a.m. because I'm having to redraw stuff that maybe I shouldn't have to be redrawing.
Oh yeah,
I guess so.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I mean, even in my process, I'll reuse a plan and just kind of merge them together in Photoshop and clean it up and fix that little area because for those particular time-saving steps when I'm just really working on the final product of presentation. But when, and I think we're all in agreement that when we're going through the actual process of discovery, that, we'll just keep cranking through, drawing after drawing after drawing and really trying to get all of that stuff out of us, kind of, ooh, let's try a different idea kind of thing. But no, I mean, I think we all have our own specific time-saving steps of how to get it presented, how to create those final graphic type things. And yeah, I didn't mean that, oops, I just realized that I forgot 2 doors. I'm going to redraw the whole entire thing. No,
right.
I won't.
No, I agree. I know. I'm just trying to explore different avenues of, when it's appropriate, when it's not appropriate, and it obviously comes down to per project or per office standard or whatever. I mean, there's no right or wrong answers here. I'm just trying to explore, when is a good time to move from paper to pencil and back again, because as I said earlier, I mean, I've got something in the computer and, I spit it out and I sketch over it.
I do that all the time too.
There's back and forth here.
Yeah, and
right?
I agree. I think, but what it really comes down to, what I'm hearing is that you've got to understand, number one, your abilities, and number two, what you can do with this stuff. Because I think, like Cormac's saying, I'm not going to redraw the plan. I mean, whiteout has been made for a reason. You're not going to draw the whole thing over again. You're going to white out that little piece and you're going to just sketch over the top of it.
Right.
Or that's what Photoshop's for, or that's what, there's so many ways to accomplish the job, and it usually doesn't mean starting over again. It means building on top of the foundation that you've already created. And I think, the better we all can get at all of these tools, the better we're going to be at all of the ways we can approach solving the problem, which is really what it's about. It's not about doing it the fastest. It's not about doing it the prettiest. Sometimes it's about doing it the fastest. Sometimes it's about doing it the prettiest. Sometimes it's about doing it analog. Sometimes it's about doing it digital. And again, you might figure out that your client likes something better. And so you've got to work that way.
That's true.
These are all things that we have to deal with. And so I guess one of the main issues that we're talking about tonight is that you've got to get good at doing things a lot of different ways so that you can choose when the time is right to use a certain way over another.
Absolutely. Because, I was just thinking the same thing. It's like all of these things that we're talking about, it doesn't mean that we have to be, exclusive analog, exclusive digital. You're right. It's just different things in our toolbox. And to master all those different tools, and you're right, find the appropriate way of, using each of these tools to make yourself efficient. And that goes back to what you were saying, Neil, is, making yourself efficient. The only way you do that is the mastery of all of these different techniques and tools that you have. Because I don't necessarily consider Revit, AutoCAD, Photoshop, whatever, I don't consider them any different than my pencil. It's a different kind of pencil. It's just a tool. And how do I master that tool, and how do I use that tool to my advantage? But it all stems from knowing how to use the pencil first.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sounds like the perfect way to end this podcast.
I agree. That's good. All right, so in that case, if you have any questions or comments, please visit our website at archispeakpodcast.com. And you can communicate with us on our individual Twitter accounts, which are listed on the website. And you can. We encourage people to post links to Twitter and on our Facebook page. And if you could leave us a message, we're still looking for that first person who's daring enough to leave us a message for a topic idea or just to say hi. That number is 415-484-8496. And also, if you like the show, please leave us a review on iTunes. All right, guys. Till next time.
All right. We'll see you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.